The crystal chandeliers shimmered like frozen constellations above the grand ballroom of the 60th floor, their light scattering across polished marble floors and gilded columns. Manhattan's elite drifted across the room in their finest attire. Politicians, magnates, celebrities, each cloaked in carefully tailored luxury. Waiters floated by with silver trays of champagne flutes, the crisp notes of the orchestra weaving to the background like silk. This was not merely a gala. It was a stage, and every guest played their part. Near the towering floor-to-ceiling windows, Alexandra Sterling stood alone, her crimson V-neck dress glowing under the chandelier's fire. The dress hugged her figure with understated elegance, yet it was her presence, poised, assured, that made people glance twice. Her hand curled around the stem of her champagne flute, though her lips barely touched the drink. Her mind wasn't on the bubbles or the glittering skyline sprawling beneath her. It was fixed on a man cutting a path across the ballroom. Damian Cross moved with the confidence of a predator, tall, lean, every gesture calculated for effect. His smile didn't warm, it sliced. His silver-gray vest shimmered in the light as he raised his glass, his sharp voice cutting through the orchestra's swell. People leaned toward him instinctively, their applause ready before his words were finished. Alexandra's stomach tightened. She had prepared herself for this night, but not for what he was about to do. At the far edge of the ballroom, Arthur Carter blended into the background. He wasn't supposed to be here, not among tuxedos and gowns. Dressed in a simple work shirt, he had been repairing the building's electrical grid earlier, making sure the gala sparkled without interruption. His presence near the service elevator marked him as invisible to most, except for the woman who suddenly reached for him. Her hand caught his arm with unexpected urgency. Alexandra's eyes, wide with panic, locked on his. Her voice, low and urgent, slipped past painted lips. "Pretend you're my husband." The word seemed impossible, surreal. But before Arthur could react, she had entwined her fingers with his. Camera flashes burst like lightning across the room, blinding him. Whispers rippled like wildfire, carrying the lie outward before either of them could pull it back. Arthur stood frozen, his pulse hammering, while Alexandra leaned closer, selling the illusion with a smile that trembled at its edges. Neither of them could know that this one moment, this desperate deception, would transform their lives forever. Alexandra Sterling was not a woman easily overlooked. At 34, she had reshaped Sterling Technologies into a powerhouse, rising from near collapse to global dominance under her iron leadership. Her wavy blonde hair framed a face that boardrooms recognized instantly, disciplined, confident, untouchable. She moved in a world where every handshake carried hidden contracts, where every smile concealed calculation. Success had demanded sacrifice. Friends turned into rivals, relationships reduced to transactions, evenings consumed by reports rather than companionship. Her office on the 58th floor looked out across the city she had conquered, but the view meant nothing when no one waited on the other side of her locked door. Love had been stripped from her vocabulary early. Richard Sterling, her father, had made sure of it. Love is weakness, he'd repeated like scripture. Emotions are liabilities. Never let them appear on your balance sheet. Alexandra had believed him, until tonight, when desperation drove her to clutch the hand of a stranger and invent a husband in front of the world. Arthur Carter couldn't have been more different. 6 years ago, he had been a rising star in engineering, offices, board meetings, patents under his name. Then tragedy crashed into his life. A drunk driver ran a red light, taking his wife Sarah and leaving him with Lily, their 7-year-old daughter, and a grief that reshaped everything. He had walked away from corporate life, traded quarterly earnings reports for the greasy honesty of a garage in Queens. His days became simple: oil changes, tire rotations, repairing what was broken with hands calloused from real work rather than contracts. Arthur's pride wasn't in balance sheets anymore. It was in Lily's laughter echoing across the garage, in the crayon blueprints she taped the walls, machines that defied physics but carried her mother's creativity and her father's persistence. At 36, Arthur measured success differently than most. In bedtime stories, in the drawings pinned above his workbench, in being present for the daughter who depended on him. And now, because of one desperate whisper in a ballroom, his world was colliding with Alexander Sterling's in a way neither could predict. The storm didn't wait long to break. Damian Cross's champagne announcement, an engagement Alexandra had never agreed to, shook the room. Applause swelled prematurely. Cameras turned toward her, waiting for confirmation. Panic flashed through her, raw and unguarded. That was when she spotted Arthur, his simple shirt and honest face anchoring her amid the predatory smiles. Instinct silenced reason. She grasped his hand, declared her husband, and rewrote both their stories in a single reckless breath. Shock rippled through the ballroom. Richard Sterling's glass paused halfway to his lips, his expression tightening into rage and calculation. Damian's gray eyes narrowed, already recalibrating his strategy. Reporters lunged, snapping photos that would flood headlines before the night was over. Tech Queen's secret marriage revealed. Arthur hardly remembered how they left the gala, only the weight of Alexandra's grip and the sudden reality that the entire city now believed in their lie. Within the hour, he stood in her office, the skyline glittering beyond the glass as she paced like a general preparing for war. Her heels clicked against marble, her words precise, relentless. 10 days, she said, until the shareholder meeting. Pretend until then and it's over. She offered him money, enough to fund Lily's education and expand his garage into a chain. Contracts were drawn, non-disclosure agreements lined up. But beneath the steel of her voice, Arthur heard something else. Loneliness, the kind that no corporate success could cure. He should have walked away. Instead, he found himself bargaining. Protect Lily. Keep her out of the spotlight. No personal intrusion beyond what the cameras demanded. She agreed, signing her name with the precision of a conqueror sealing territory. By dawn, Arthur Carter was no longer just a mechanic from Queens. He was, on paper and in public, the husband of one of the most powerful women in New York. The fallout was immediate. Morning papers blazed with headlines, television anchors speculated endlessly, and Richard Sterling exploded in fury. Alexander faced him with icy composure, spinning Arthur as a strategic choice, an everyman image that would soften Sterling Technologies' reputation, humanizing the empire. Richard didn't buy it. He ordered investigations, background checks, surveillance. Damian, meanwhile, sharpened his knives. He understood pressure, understood that every lie cracked eventually. To him, Arthur was a flaw, a weak point waiting to be exploited. And Damian had no intention of letting Alexandra, or Sterling Technologies, slip through his fingers. The first strike landed swiftly. Paparazzi swarmed Arthur's garage, shouting questions, terrifying Lily. Arthur knew, then they couldn't stay. Alexandra arranged for them to move into corporate housing, luxurious, sterile, suffocating. Lily walked through the apartment like a museum, afraid to touch anything. That night, when she asked if they were in trouble, Arthur had no answer. The next morning, Alexandra arrived with contracts in hand, prepared for business as usual, until she noticed Lily's drawings spread across the pristine dining table. Dragons soared between skyscrapers. Flying cars zipped above Central Park, a child's imagination turning the cold skyline into magic. For a moment, Alexandra's armor cracked. She knelt in her designer dress, speaking to Lily eye to eye, not as an executive but as a person. By the time she left, she carried 3 new drawings tucked carefully into her bag, though she would never admit how much they mattered. That was only the beginning. The first public appearance loomed, demanding precision, choreography, and lies polished to perfection. And Arthur Carter, a man who fixed cars and tucked his daughter at night, was about to step onto the stage of Manhattan's elite. This time not as an outsider, but as a husband. The air inside the fast food restaurant grew tense. The group of college students who had been laughing moments earlier now shifted nervously in their seats. The sound of military boots striking the tile floor was unmistakable, steady, firm, and full of authority. One by one, uniformed men and women from the Air Force surrounded the scene. They weren't just random passers-by. They were comrades of the woman in the wheelchair. Her reputation had preceded her, and her courage had left a mark that spread far beyond the airfields where she had once flown. "Ma'am," one of them said with a respectful nod, "are these the ones bothering you?" The students froze, their smirks wiped clean. They had thought they were untouchable, just kids having what they call fun. But now, faced with dozens of disciplined Air Force personnel standing at attention, their arrogance melted into fear. The woman in the wheelchair, an F-16 pilot who had once flown through storms of fire and steel, met their eyes without flinching. Her calm, steady presence was more intimidating than any shouted reprimand. "You think I'm weak because of this chair?" she asked, her voice clear. "Let me tell you something. This chair isn't a cage. It's proof that I survived. I've flown missions you can't even imagine. I protected skies, so you could laugh freely in your classrooms. And the only reason you can mock me today is because people like me, and people like them," she gestured to the Air Force members standing behind her, "stood between you and real danger." Silence blanketed the restaurant. Even the employees behind the counter stopped moving, listening intently. The students' bravado had vanished completely, their faces flushed with shame as whispers of disapproval rippled to the crowd of other diners. One young man from the group stammered, "We didn't mean anything. We were just joking." "Joking?" One of the airmen repeated sharply, stepping forward. "Disrespect isn't a joke. Mocking someone who sacrificed for this country isn't a joke. You wouldn't last a day in her boots." The leader of the Air Force contingent, a tall officer with medals glinting on his chest, raised a hand to quiet the growing tension. He leaned forward slightly, speaking in a calm but commanding tone. "You should understand something," he told the students. "This woman isn't just a veteran. She's a fighter pilot who carried out missions that save lives. Some of the very people standing behind me are here today because of her actions. She doesn't need our protection. We're here because she's earned our respect." The students' eyes widened. For the first time, they began to realize the weight of their actions. They hadn't just mocked a stranger in a wheelchair. They had insulted a hero who had stared death in the face and kept flying. One of the female students whispered, almost too quietly to hear, "We're sorry." The pilot gave a faint smile, not out of forgiveness yet, but out of quiet strength. "Don't apologize to me," she said. "Apologize to every person who wears this uniform. Apologize to yourselves for thinking cruelty makes you powerful. True strength isn't in tearing others down. It's in lifting others up." The message struck harder than any punishment could. Heads hung low, voices faltered, and slowly, hesitantly, the group of students muttered their apologies. Some of the other customers clapped softly, the sound spreading until the whole restaurant echoed with applause. The Air Force personnel saluted the pilot, their respect shining through every precise movement. For them, this wasn't just about defending her dignity. It was about honoring her resilience, reminding everyone present that heroes don't always stand tall. Sometimes they roll forward, carrying scars the world cannot see. As the students shuffled out, humbled and subdued, the pilot wheeled herself forward. She didn't need help, but one of her fellow officers gently opened the door for her anyway. The sunlight outside cast a warm glow on her face, highlighting the quiet determination in her eyes. "Why did you all come here?" she asked softly once they were outside. The officer at her side smiled. "Because word travels fast when one of our own is disrespected. You've inspired too many of us for too long. We weren't about to let it slide." The pilot let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. For the first time in a long while, she felt not just respected, but truly seen. Inside, the restaurant buzz slowly returned, but the memory of what had just happened lingered. Conversations shifted from idle chatter to quiet reflections. Parents whispered lessons to their children about respect, sacrifice, and dignity. And the group of college students, walking in silence down the street, carried a weight heavier than any textbook they had ever held. They would never forget the day they mocked a woman in a wheelchair, only to discover she was an F-16 pilot, a protector of skies, and a symbol of resilience. And they would never forget the moment the Air Force arrived, not with anger, but with unwavering respect, showing them the true meaning of honor. That day, the world learned a lesson. Strength isn't measured by how loudly you laugh at others, but by how quietly you stand for them when it matters most.